Next up is Parry Bhatia, or Parry as he's called, is a Chief AI Officer at GE HealthCare. Parry leads the machine learning organization while building a new machine learning capability to ensure that GE HealthCare gets the best patient outcomes from digital solutions through leveraging machine learning, large language models, and foundational models. Parry was recently recognized in Modern Healthcare's 40 Under 40. Parry, welcome.
Thank you.
Now I hand it over to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone.
We'll need to change the content.
Yes, we need to change. Okay. Anyway, I will start. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to talk today about, AI-powered innovations in healthcare, specifically in imaging, in digital health, but really also on the future of healthcare overall. And we will do that from a standpoint of what does it mean for patients, what does it mean for healthcare professionals, and also what does it mean for hospitals. We will also do that emphasizing the close collaboration we have with Nvidia to enable a lot of these innovations. So we're going to break our presentation today into three main sections. One is to talk about the challenges in healthcare overall, because there are significant challenges today in our world. Secondly, we'll talk about examples of AI-powered innovations. We will take these, from our strategy at GE HealthCare, how to ultimately overcome some of these challenges, especially by incorporating AI in these solutions. And third, as said, we will talk about the future. And the future is very much, again, enabled by what's possible today. And there's so much more possible today than what was possible 5 years or 10 years ago. So this is going to be a very exciting update. So let's start with the key challenges. If we look at healthcare today globally, we have an aging population, and in fact, a growing population everywhere. We have a rise of chronic disease prevalence wherever we look. And we actually realize that today, 1/3 of people, 1/3 of all people, will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their life. Cardiovascular diseases are the number one cause of death globally. And 75% of that actually happens in the emerging world, where also 4.5 billion people, it's a staggering number, 4.5 billion people, don't even have proper access to healthcare. So these are some very fundamental, big challenges which we deal with globally in healthcare. But they can sound a little abstract. So let's put the focus on a patient, on a single patient, right? And so what we see here, this image is not a marketing image. This is a real life image from an operating room where a patient, a woman in their 50s, was actually undergoing a liver surgery. And this woman actually, or the surgery took place 3 months after some first, pain, some abdominal pain, some unintended weight loss. So this woman went to a primary care physician, had a number of exams, was admitted to hospital, went to radiology, went to multiple exams, did lab tests, did CTs, MRs, ultrasounds, so all that. And over these several months, ultimately a treatment, so the diagnosis was made and the treatment plan was conducted. So if we put ourselves in the shoes of this patient, what that means for a single patient, for her family, it is actually a very disturbing kind of thought. And at the same time, during that period, there was this similar challenge on the flip side of healthcare professionals, because one healthcare professional after another got exposed to this woman, tried to understand the context and her condition, and ultimately, hand over from one specialist to the next to arrive at a treatment plan which is most effective for this personalized situation. So it is a huge undertaking, and ultimately, it also underscores how fragmented the healthcare system still is today in how all these constituents work together. So this is one of the underlying challenges we have, why healthcare is so complex overall. Now, if we look at that, at that fact, along that pathway, along that journey, there's a lot of data generated. And there are studies actually undertaken which said an average hospital has about 50 petabytes of data generated per year. So for those of you, me included, who don't know, what's a petabyte, right? It's 1,000,000 gigabytes. So it's a lot of data. It's the same as about 8 billion books, or 53 times the British Library, which is pretty big. And so that is just happening every single year. But if you think about it, the second study was actually analyzing that actually out of all that data, only 3% are really used. 97% of that data is actually just generated, it's stored, it's never really retrieved. For those of you like me yesterday, you heard Jensen talk about retrieval, right, computing. We haven't even arrived at retrieval computing in healthcare, as opposed to go to generative computing. So a lot of data unused. What a waste, right? Some more data points. At the same time, we know that today about 60% of doctors spend more time with EMRs than with patients, so with electronic medical records. 60% of doctors would confirm that. They spend more time there to, again, to ultimately retrieve all the right data, to make meaning of it, but not only the clinical data, it's also administrative tasks. It's about scheduling a patient, finding the right patient, finding assistance, etc. So there is a lot of burden on these healthcare professionals. And ultimately, not all of that, translates really into the direct patient care. This is also something which is stressing healthcare professionals. A lot of healthcare professionals, deal with a lot of stress due to the patient load they have and the fact that they might not be able to fulfill their ultimate duty. And so ultimately that translates to 100% staff turnover, currently measured in major healthcare systems. What does it mean? Like over 5 years, pretty much everyone, or at least the total number of healthcare professionals has churned one time. It could be nurses, doctors, etc. That's a huge number again. If you think about it, retention is such a major priority for healthcare systems today. Education of new healthcare professionals is another major one. But ultimately, if so many people churn through the healthcare system, there's a lot of burden on the system overall. And so let's take a quick minute to hear directly from some healthcare, professionals, some healthcare providers, how they see these challenges.
We just do not have enough resources to be able to manage the amount of patients that we have coming through the door.
300, 400 new patients a year. More and more robust challenge.
The care that we're giving patients is more complex. The patients are genuinely sicker.
Our emergency rooms are full, the inpatient beds are full.
You have lots of unexpected surprises, and that never feels good.
When I say noise, I say false alarms. The nurse tends to be overburdened by every day.
Every single machine we use will have an alarm on it. And from that comes alarm fatigue.
You have base data, 14, 15 terabytes.
How can a human brain even process that?
Then this data will grow.
We're missing the boat on software integration.
They're not designed to work together.
So how do we deal with that complexity without overwhelming our frontline providers?
Can we get to a point where there is truly zero harm because we have partnered with technology to make a safe environment for our patients?
So Parry, what can we do about that?
All right, so looking into some of the challenges that Roland talked about, at G HealthCare, we are actually looking how we can tackle these challenges by focusing on our D3 strategy. At the core, it consists of 3 main components. How do we make our devices smarter? How do we actually integrate more smartness into our devices with AI? Secondly, how do we actually provide digital solutions for the patients across their care journey, all the way from screening, diagnosis, treatment, and therapy? And finally, how do we address the key challenges and the burden on the providers with the amount of overwhelming data that is getting created, which is multimodal in nature? Now let's dive deeper into some of the examples of how we are solving this with our D3 strategy. Let me give an example of what we mean by smart devices. Some of the technologies that we have built out over here kind of goes into how do we make our devices smarter. One of the key examples came out into our MR device, which is called as AirRecon DL, which was launched in 2020. And if we look across it, it makes our images scan faster as well as accurate by reducing the scan time by 50%. Now, what does it mean for providers? So in the past, if they could do 3 scans in an hour on an MR machine, now they can actually go through up to 6 scans with the same resources. So there's a huge lift on the throughput for the providers, as well as providing earlier access to the patients in need. And as we're working and embarking on this journey, you would see more and more of those intelligence looking into the co-pilot experience that we provide across the spectrum of care as we go into this space, making our devices more smarter, as well as shifting from on-prem, offline, towards more cloud-based offerings as well. Secondly, as Roland talked about, one of the key challenges why AI hasn't taken off in healthcare as compared to any other industry is healthcare data is multimodal in nature, and B, it is segmented and fragmented across multiple areas in silos as well. At GE HealthCare, we are really strategizing and kind of focusing on how do we synthesize this multimodal data that can come from these different fragmented sources as well. And as we do that, we can actually unlock 10x different use cases. We all know about a person who has been in need of that last clinical trial that can be used across their cancer journey in itself as well. This is where AI can be used as well. Once we can bring all the data together, we can actually think of how we can match a patient with the right clinical trial. Because if we look into even the current studies, there's been a lot of research in this space for the last 10 years, but only 7% of the patients are actually enrolled into clinical trials. And lastly, looking at a more enterprise level, how do we really streamline operations at a hospital? And that's where one of our AI-enabled offering, Command Center, comes into place, where we actually reduce the length of stay by predictive analytics. To give you some context and examples on these, Deaconess Health, leveraging Command Center, was actually able to improve capacity utilization, resulting in 2,000 more beds annually served. Humber River was actually able to reduce length of stay that resulted in new capacity of 35 new beds without adding any physical bed at all. Looking ahead, we are trying to bring in more AI and innovation in this space by making this process more streamlined, focusing on staffing, patient flow, as well as bed management problems to make sure we can actually predict them days or weeks in advance, making sure we can recommend solutions and make the system more proactive. Now, I pass the mic to Roland, who's going to go into details of how some of these visions come to life.
Yeah, thank you, Parry. So we will give you a few more examples of what we mean with smart devices, right? So smarter devices which actually have, logic inside, which are AI-enabled, which give guidance to users and ultimately make them more confident or accelerate a diagnosis. So take this example, right? How can we acquire better images for every patient? In the area of MRI, cardiac MRI, so you want to assess the heart of patients, this is a very long procedure traditionally. It can take like 30 to 90 minutes of a patient. And if you think about 30 to 90 minutes, laying in an MRI device, needing to hold your breath repeatedly, that is quite distressing for certain patients. Right? If you talk about younger children, if you talk about elderly people, so they might not be able to just even do that, right? Or do that with the necessary consistency. So that can be a very, very difficult procedure to undertake. And so to solve that problem, right, we actually have been able to apply AI in the area of deep learning of the raw data of MRI itself. So essentially, we take the raw data, we actually make meaning out of the raw data, to identify and reduce artifacts, and ultimately to optimize this particular exam for this, for this use case, for this cardiac, assessment of a heart in a single beat. So what's happening then is ultimately that all these images get optimized, the noise, gets out of the signal. We have been able to improve the speed here by 12 times for this particular examination, 12 times faster. And at the same time, the image quality is better. So the overall exam time, could be reduced by 83%. That really means that we are cutting from half an hour to 90 minutes to a few minutes for this particular, so important examination. And if you think about now what that means for these patients, which we have talked about, right? Instead of being there for 30 to 90 minutes, only be there a few minutes, makes a whole lot of a difference. It can actually mean that certain patients even can be assessed the first time with this technology. And it also means that for a healthcare system, for the physicians and for the healthcare, for the hospital as such, they can ultimately provide access to patients faster, and they can ultimately also run more patients through their equipment. So a lot of benefits coming out of such a technology. And this is just one example here in cardiac MRI. We have similar examples in the world of CT and ultrasound, also in X-ray and mammography. So we can apply these principles broadly. And that has been a major breakthrough over the last several years. Now, another example, how do we actually deal with some really critical cases? So here we talk about the case of a potential collapsed lung. If you think about a patient gets admitted to the hospital, say in the middle of the night, right? And there is suspicion of a collapsed lung. So there's real life-threatening, it's a life-threatening disease. It's also called pneumothorax. So how can this be diagnosed, quickly, because it is a very, very severe potential disease? So ultimately, there is an X-ray done, and first you take the X-ray, you acquire the right images with the X-ray, but then you still need a radiologist in that night shift to be available to read it. And that can, on average, again, take 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. So there's a substantial risk here for this patient that something bad may happen in that period of time. So again, we could use AI here in such a use case to make devices smarter, and that's what we did. So what you see here on the screen is this little red signage, which actually would tell the user in this mobile X-ray that there is something AI found which looks really, really suspicious. It looks like a potentially critical case of pneumothorax. So this is already what that first physician would see at that moment of point of care with that patient at hand, even if the radiology is not available yet. And so this first physician or technician can ultimately, triage that. And then, AI gets a step further. It would ultimately tell us more about where is this suspicious, zone exactly sitting here in the lung. It would give us a scoring of confidence, right? It would say, is this a 98% confident finding, or is it just a 55? That makes quite a difference as well in the way how they ultimately would take the next step. So if you think about this example, again, this is not about, is AI better than physicians? We always believe it's the combination that makes ultimately real difference for patients. But here it's about a life-threatening situation where without this AI assist, we would have a much higher risk of dealing with the patient. A third example, how do we expand access to care? So we wanted to draw an example which is a bit more, you might say remote, right? Reaching remote areas. So this is a true story. This is Dr. Yasukawa in Japan. He's actually dealing with patients which are in very remote areas of Japan. At these islands, Miyakoshima, 300 miles away from the main island. So how does he reach patients there? And by the way, Japan has one of the, is one of the countries with real demographics of more and more elderly people in their population. So in that sense, he needs to be able to reach these patients, and he does that even with his jet ski. He has a portable ultrasound device, a handheld ultrasound, and his smartphone. That's all he needs. He goes on the jet ski, goes to this remote place, ultimately does an ultrasound assessment, and with this first insight about the patient's condition, ultimately takes a decision whether this person can ultimately, again, whether there is an issue at all, or whether this person needs to do something, maybe be transported to a next place, right? So a really interesting use case. Now, for such situations where you wanna put a user with like a handheld ultrasound device to a patient, we thought about how do we ensure that at the moment, at the point of care, the guidance of this user is there so that they know what to look at, what to scan, and ultimately how to get to this good acquisition, which later on can lead to a good examination. And so this is again an AI-enabled capability, which would essentially, it's like in your car. Your navigation system in the car will tell you where to go, when to turn left, when to turn right. Similar concept here. Right, you apply an ultrasound, you hold it in a certain position, and the system would, with AI feedback, let you know whether you are at the right angle, whether you have the right depth, and ultimately have a confidence indicator, a quality meter, whether what you see here is really diagnostically relevant and good enough, and then ultimately saving these best images right away, so you don't need to care. So you get the sense that with such smart AI plugs, you can actually make such a user experience so much easier. It's so much more intuitive to acquire a really good diagnostic image or set of images, and then ultimately you can hand it off, to the hospital, to an AI algorithm in the cloud, and ultimately qualify what was acquired here. So all these examples, these 3 examples here, are examples of smart devices which we are building in order to support the patient journey. By the way, the last example is also interesting in that regard, that we are currently working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to bring these technologies to low and medium income countries. So Bill and Melinda Gates has been, kindly funded us to transform these capabilities and make it really accessible for low and medium income countries as well. So again, some really smart device solutions. However, that is not the whole story, because if you talk about the whole patient journey, like a cancer journey, such a patient, as mentioned, would actually undergo several steps, right? So here we have a male patient. He's suffering from prostate cancer, and in that case, again, there is a whole pathway of examinations taking place. It may have started at a urologist. There was some ultrasound, there was some MRI taken, maybe some additional lab tests, and all that leads to a complete picture of this patient's condition. Now, physicians then need to, stitch all that together and ultimately form, what do we do here, right? What is the right path, the personalized path? And what is interesting, that 100% of physicians, if they are surveyed, find it complex and demanding to put all this data from these different modalities together and form this decision. So 100% find this really, really demanding. And actually, 14% of physicians would even say they are not confident that they have reviewed all potential angles on a patient case. Think about that. 14% of physicians would say they are not sure, they are not certain that they have really reviewed everything which could potentially, be taken into account. So that also tells us there is some uncertainty that such a disease or such a treatment, path is ultimately the real best effective one. And so what do we, do with that? One proven method in the area of cancer is actually to not only rely on like one specialist, but actually compose a tumor board, right? So bring multiple specialties together, have a tumor board where this board meeting on a specific patient case is discussing, again, in a multidisciplinary fashion, what do we see here, how to deal with that patient. Now, it sounds great, but also these tumor boards have challenges because you first need to organize that. You need to bring all these specialists together, so you have a scheduling and availability challenge in itself. And then obviously there is a challenge of consensus, right? Everyone has certain opinions, so you want that, but you all ultimately see that it can be a demanding thing to arrive at these conclusions. And then obviously it's all about giving all these specialists then at the tumor board all the right data at the right time about this particular patient. So it's also about going back to all these archives and starting to retrieve and put it together in a meaningful way. So there are a lot of challenges involved with tumor boards, and that's also why, again, they are imperfect, they are costly as well, and they should be improved in order to ultimately give access to more patients' treatments. So is there a better way? And so we thought about there could be a better way, using state-of-the-art contemporary AI, and Parry will tell us more about that.
As Roland talked about, today physicians are spending a significant amount of time getting up to speed on the patient's history, where for a new patient, it can actually take up to hours. The process is time-consuming and frustrating for multiple reasons, because they have to surf through large amounts of unstructured multimodal data that is spread out across multiple silos and is fragmented for them to come out with the best treatment options. As Roland talked about, 86% of the clinicians actually, when we did the survey, feel frustrated with the current process where they have to review and find all the data to get to the right answer. Care teams need data that is aggregated and visualized specifically for oncology, along with the tools that can actually support the decision making across the process as well. So that's where we worked on Care Intellect, where Care Intellect for oncology actually is a cloud-based application that helps you to synthesize this multimodal healthcare data that is actually accessible in a single pane of glass to actually streamline decision making. Care Intellect for Oncology is powered with AI. So AI can be used not just at the output level, but also to aggregate or synthesize this unstructured and multimodal data, bringing in more value across the value chain as well. It actually leverages Gen AI capabilities to summarize patient data so that meaningful insights and actions can be taken across the spectrum of things as well. Providing this longitudinal multimodal data synthesis can actually empower clinicians towards looking into the disease, how disease is doing, how's the disease progression happening, as well as flag potential deviations that can happen from the treatment path. We talked about the history, what we have been doing so far. GTC is about future, so let's talk about the future. Over the next 5 to 10 minutes, we'll talk about how we are thinking about the future with technologies like Agentic AI, foundation models. How do we really streamline things like autonomous systems across the board as well? So let's start with a high-level problem on how do we solve the problem of tumor board. So last year, we actually announced a research project, Health Companion, where multiple AI agents work together, much like a virtual tumor board, to proactively generate treatment recommendation options for the physicians. This marks a significant difference from being a reactive system to a proactive system, where the system is able to not just assist, but being able to provide inputs, suggest outputs, as well as explain its logic, kind of going across the workflow and supporting physicians in making more informed and data-driven decisions. Let's take a closer look at this. All of you may know about agents for the last 1 year, where Agentic AI uses the power of foundation models to go out there in the real world, interact with the environment, and perform all kinds of tasks for you. Over here, we are leveraging Agentic AI technology on one of the hardest problems in cancer treatment, which is disease progression. As you may know, determining how to treat cancer hinges on what the cancer is doing at a particular point in time. Answering this question requires going into longitudinal data, which is multimodal, that spans across multiple disciplines, as Roland earlier talked about. While I'll not go into the technical details of the system that we built out, where multiple agentic systems are built out in a hierarchical way, how they coordinate across, but let me give you a simplified view for this. Health Companion is an AI-based research project that is a virtual expert AI agents to help solve this problem. Over here, each agent is solving a particular problem in data. One agent is looking into the clinical data, another agent is looking into the biological, another is looking into the radiological, genomic, and even into the coverage data. These agents then provide their recommendations to the supervisory agent. And then supervisory agent collates that information and then comes out with a best treatment plan. Now, as we go into the next phase of AI, why this technology is really empowering is because it can reason. We have seen in the last 3 to 6 months how these reasoning capabilities are really becoming powerful as well. Because as we saw, even in tumor board, multiple experts reason and talk about what could be the pros and cons across multiple areas as well. So how do we bring some of those capabilities across these different areas as well? However, there is one important thing. As we build these technologies, even in the era of Agentic AI, embracing it responsibly, transparently is going to be really important. One of the points that is really important even in this research project of Health Companion, there's always physician in the loop. And rather than thinking of replacing physicians, this basically empowers physicians to make sense of years' worth of longitudinal data to come out with an effective treatment plan. This way, they'll spend less time on the mundane task as well as the cumbersome task of combining those data sets, but actually making human connections with the patients. Now, let me walk through an example of how Health Companion might work out in real world. An oncologist enters the note, a Health Companion agent conducts a detailed analysis, and a supervisory agent comes out with a care plan. It then alerts a radiologist, where a radiologist then produces a report on recently acquired images. A Care Intellect application for operations detects this request, orchestrates the necessary appointments, and proposes a schedule for necessary approvals. And our vision for this is to build an interconnected system, an intelligent ecosystem that not only streamlines this patient care journey, but it also leverages analytics and proactive interventions to alleviate the standard of care.
Thank you, Parry. So these were some examples along the strategy which we set in the beginning. So talking about, make devices smarter, ultimately help physicians to get to certain insights faster and also increase the quality and make sure this quality is consistent, which is often the input to the further advanced, capabilities. The second thing is really the care journey, right? So make more horizontal, if you will, meaning of all these steps along the journey of each patient. And of course, that is different per disease state, whether we talk about different types of oncology, whether we talk about neurology, cardiology. These are different care pathways where some of these same technologies come to play, but we need to combine the data and make different meaning in different ways. So that is really a second very important point. And as Parry said, the big potential here is to take all the time away from physicians to find everything, but ultimately to present a lot of these findings to them and then ultimately guide their decision making. And the third example of solutions is really about how can smarter AI-enabled capabilities, making use of the data, all this data, this 97%, which is not used at all today, how can that lead to more effective and efficient hospital operations, including how to triage, the right patients, how to ultimately bring the right people, the right physicians and healthcare providers to that particular patient at the right time. So there are a lot of challenges which can be solved in that domain. So as we have just walked you through a few examples, we want to emphasize, these are all examples which we have, started to do or have actually, live in motion at customers. And this wouldn't have been possible without this really strong collaboration with Nvidia. This relationship actually goes back 17 years, where we started formally to work together. That was, in fact, before AI was, cool, before it was really discovered as so powerful. And I would say, on this journey and all these examples, enabling us to create smarter medical devices, again, up to the point that we are today leading in the industry with FDA-cleared medical devices, more than 80 such clearances are existing. We couldn't have done this without Nvidia. So we're very proud about this, partnership and this joint success. But we are by far not done, right? We have just, reached a certain level, and we believe, as Jensen also said, we are seeing other levels now of possibilities, including, for example, reasoning, which we can embrace and create more solutions. And so now in this last section, I want to give you a few snippets of areas which we are, working on and how we are working closely together with Nvidia as well as we speak. Parry.
So starting the journey with Nvidia and HealthCare runs for more than 15 years, where the journey started from really high performance RTX GPUs for medical imaging to actually progressing towards using Nvidia's advanced GPU data centers as well as now getting into the era of how do we embrace and incorporate the latest and greatest from Blackwell technology to really streamline and orchestrate huge amounts of medical imaging data across the spectrum of things as well. And as we start to leverage these capabilities, finally adopting state-of-the-art NVIDIA DGX systems prepares our system for the future, which we believe will position HealthCare at the forefront of innovation. Let me give you some of the examples of how we're actually doing that. So HealthCare has been a pioneer in building medical imaging foundation models, where we have partnered with multiple technology players. Healthcare is about collaborations, and solving these hard problems, you need to have those collaborations and synergies. So there is, on one end of the spectrum, collaborations and synergies with clinical partners to understand the use cases, identify and align, build the right components and foundation models. And on the other end, you need the technology lift, and that's where technology leaders like Nvidia and AWS come into play, where you can really streamline and build these capabilities at 10x the pace as well. We recently announced our development of industry's first X-ray, full body X-ray foundation model and an MR foundation model. And also one of the work which is SonoSam, which we built in collaboration with Nvidia. Let me spend a couple of minutes on these models, and then I'll go into the details of what we have specifically done with SonoSam, which is the ultrasound foundation model. We all know about the large language models, the bytes of data it takes. Anyone has guesses of one scan of 3D MR that's done? One scan of MR is about 5 to 10 gigabytes, and it can go even higher with higher resolution. So we can think about the type of challenges and problems that we are talking over here, and at that scale as well. Now, because the problem is so hard, in the past, most of the research has been done to approximate that 3D into 2D and kind of build out those downstream applications across the spectrum of things as well. However, this results in an approximation of the original image, limiting the model's ability to analyze intricate three-dimensional structures, where with our three-dimensional foundation model, you can actually overcome some of these challenges, where this capability overcome challenges, especially in complex cases like brain tumors, skeletal disorders, as well as cardiovascular diseases, while maintaining the comprehensive view of the surrounding tissue, which vastly improves the diagnostic accuracy of the system. Additionally, these models are multimodal in nature as well. So they can take in text, they can understand the images as well. So imagine you can give a prompt of text and generate an image, or from an image, it can generate a report as well. And it works from off the shelf in itself as well. Next, we'll talk about SonoSam. This is some of the joint collaboration which we did with Nvidia as well. We all are familiar with a smartphone, where when we are trying to use a smartphone, we'll do a couple of clicks on a camera that will zoom on the right person and will take that click. Imagine providing that same experience to the physicians, where they might be interested in a tumor, they might be interested in a soft tissue, but with minimal number of clicks, they can get to the right organ. And then, as with a smartphone, it gives them the tracking capability, where as the tumor moves in the body, they can track that in real time as well. Now, providing those capabilities in the hands of the customers is one of the key areas that we have been focusing on. Now, how is this model different than any models in the past? Yes, it performs really well, 90% plus accuracy on a lot of segmentation use cases. But what's even more important is the model was never trained on a lot of anatomies, like breast lesion. Now, imagine a startup or anyone who's starting to or planning to build an application on breast lesion. The model was already at 90% plus accuracy. So you're starting at 90% and taking it to the next level. And that's the power of these foundation models as well. And that's where we leverage a lot of NVIDIA infrastructure, not just on building these models, but as we earlier talked about, access becomes important. How do we take these technologies to the remote places? So we were actually able to distill and quantize this model to a small size that could actually fit into a handheld ultrasound, which is almost the size of this. Next, moving on to the next frontier, which is on, again, an area of exploration. Can imaging be used for treatment and therapy as well? So that's where bioelectric medicine has become a really important topic, where bioelectric medicine seeks innovative methods to treat chronic diseases by precisely modulating the nervous system through electronic devices. It's an early technology. Some of the clinical trials are happening in this space, where it has huge impacts from cancer treatment to obesity and multiple other areas as well. But right now, it is one size that fits all. With AI, you can take it to the next level, because as with any therapy, you need personalization of those things to go across the board as well. So how do you really streamline that? And that's where some of the NVIDIA stack can really streamline these operations across the spectrum of things. Next, I'll pass on to Roland.
Yeah, before our team session starts here. Last case we want to talk about. We're very excited about the announcement we made yesterday together with Nvidia, talking about autonomous medical devices, autonomous X-ray, autonomous ultrasound. So we are going back to X-ray one more time with this example. X-ray has been around more than 100 years. We actually, as a company, have been bringing X-ray to the world more than 100 years ago. It's the first imaging technology, if you will. And still today, X-ray is the most used technology as well, worldwide. More than 2.6 billion exams are taken. But also it's true that more than 25% of these images are not usable. So, and we ultimately need to do a better job to help users to get to these proper X-rays, and ultimately also, help users which are not aware of how to use this, trained into the subject. So as we said before, a lot of healthcare organizations are short-handed these days. So what we have decided is, and this is our last page, we are going to develop autonomous medical devices, more autonomous medical devices than we have seen before, starting with X-ray and ultrasound. So we have a vision to ultimately make these devices, again, like semi-automated or potentially automated, which means guiding also a patient and guiding a patient and needing minimal healthcare professional involvement in order to get to this proper first acquisition and then ultimately lead to the interpretation. So we can, after we close in the break, we can talk more about how we do this. We're going to hand off to the next speakers, but this is what we are so excited about to introduce here with GTC, that we are going to start this collaboration with Nvidia, again, both in the area of X-ray and ultrasound, and that will get us to the next frontier of what we can achieve in healthcare. So let us close here real quick with a point, again, to summarize. I hope we could underpin with this presentation. Healthcare has a number of unprecedented burdens these days, real challenges in the world, which we can overcome by applying contemporary, AI capabilities, use the cloud and use all that together with partners. So G Healthcare and Nvidia are on that forefront to defining and redefining what's possible. And that is really our mission and our purpose as a company, creating a world where healthcare has no limits. So thank you very much. Looking forward to talk more about it.